when you thought no one else was going to step up. A bit of domino effect. Paco Craig on the first one. The second one is half a challenge by Illich on a makeshift bicycle. In steps Luke Spencer, steps up. Thank you very much. The home squad feels it.
It's going to be a fun matchup for sure. And for me, it goes back to the storied tradition for the University of Virginia, royalty when it comes to this beautiful sport. But Georgetown have a few tricks of their own up their sleeve. They're hoping that they can knock them off and be the kings of college soccer.
So he's telegraphing the fact that he's going to come back across his body. When it comes to momentum, unless you're going to put this on the ground, if you're going to go for power, you know that it's coming back across the hips. A freshman who's had experience at the USL Championship professional level comes up at the highest of stages to give his boys the national championship.
Texas has also been getting some significant rain over the past couple of weeks, and there's just no feeling quite like the humidity you experience, freshly cut grass, steam coming up, moisture from the ground. At least the sun has taken the rest of the night off.
Love the picture you're painting for me there. You can see it on the park too.
Opportunity again out wide, 1v1. Dancing, delivering, and able to send it home. Kastner got it started with an expert delivery. And the Toros are back on top.
I think the Stampede, you can see the flares coming out, the streamers. RGV very happy with Ruben Luna stepping up with that 2-1 finish. Jorginho James playing a great ball outside. TJ Kastner going one-on-one with the step over ball placed across the middle, and Ruben Luna had plenty of time. Terrible marking by S2, and I'll take that right on my foot in the back of the net. 2-1 RGV.
For Luna, his first goal of the season since that PK back on April 8th. Got his account started this year.
And as we continue to check in with some colleagues around the country, wanted to have this opportunity to check in with Devon Kerr. Devon, thank you very much. I want to apologize for everybody who was anticipating that I'd be talking to the Canadian goalkeeper for the Washington Spirit, but this Devon's a little more readily available. But Devon, I appreciate your time, and certainly I enjoyed crossing paths with you a few years ago, but look forward to catching up and seeing how everything is now after this restart.
Lincoln, I appreciate you having me on, brother. It's actually the first reference that I've heard for the national team. Usually it's one of my arch nemesis because she actually played for Ohio State. My family's true and blue Penn State. So usually it's, oh, the girl from Ohio State. And I have to get into it and we come to blows quite rapidly. But yeah, man, always honored to have any opportunity to chat. And I was grateful that you reached out.
It has been so fun to watch your career and how things have escalated so quickly, at least from an outsider's vantage point. I remember the first time you and I were paired together on some matches remotely from a studio in Florida. I didn't know you, you didn't know me, but after working those 90 minutes with you, I immediately thought this guy has everything going for him. Not only knows the game, but unlike a lot of younger analysts I'll work with who certainly know the game, have lived the game, you knew how to communicate it. And you were enthusiastic every time that I shut up, jumping in and sharing something with the audience each time.
I appreciate that. It's been a wild ride, to say the least. You know, you go back to 2017, which was our first opportunity to work together, and I was only doing this part-time. You know, I got into this very haphazardly. One of the executive producers of Vista World Link, a production company in South Florida, reached out to me. We had a mutual acquaintance, and he actually reached out to me and, you know, was looking for actually female talent. They were looking for women broadcasters for NWSL games. And I said, sure, no problem. Had a bunch of friends that were fortunate enough to play on the national team, all Americans coming out of college. So I passed a few his way and, you know, I went about my way. He kept circling back around though. That initial contact was in January of 17. And he kind of reached out and said, hey, you know, with your background, would you have any interest in doing this? I actually told him no 5 or 6 times. And finally, in May of 2017, he came to me and said, listen, you know, I've hung out with you a bunch. You could be great at this. You could be terrible. But my interaction with you so far, you're a good communicator. You've got a decent vocabulary. You're outgoing. Why don't you give this a try and just see where it goes? So I actually went into the studio, and the 2 guys that I sat behind, 2 fantastic people. I started with Drew Felios, who is now, not only will he work for ESPN, is the voice of the Tampa Bay Rowdies. And Dallin does stuff for ESPN all over the place, and was getting involved with CBS Sports Interactive back then. And he was the voice of NWSL back in 17 and 18. And I just kind of listened to them, did a few dry runs, and they said, you know what, give it a go. I was actually an estate manager at the time, funny enough. And so I would drive about an hour and a half, 2 hours just to get to the studio, and then have to go all the way back when I got done, because I basically worked a 24/7 gig. Come the end of the 2017 season, done about 20, 25 games. And I just kind of looked around and I surveyed my life, and multiple conversations with producers that I was fortunate enough to work with, play-by-play, a lot of play-by-play and production were my influences. And I kind of picked their brains, yourself included, and said, how do I get better? You know, where do I have an opportunity to actually do this for a living? And the communication that kept coming back was pretty positive. So my wife and I sat down and said, listen, you know, I think in the long run, this is going to be better for not only you, but for us. And the ceiling was higher from a salary standpoint. There was a lot less travel, believe it or not, compared to the job that I was in. And we just decided to pull the ripcord. So stepped away from my position, took 4 months off of work, and come March of 2018, it's kind of the first year that I hit the ground running. I don't want to say the rest is history, so they say, but that's basically how I got into this business.
Yeah, what stands out in my mind about you is you've been able to break through what I think is a ceiling for a lot of analysts that is not held against play-by-play guys. It does not matter what my experience was with the sport, whether I was already a name before I decided to show up and start providing narration to a game. For the analyst, it's often held against you if you aren't, you know, already a guy who wore the red, white, and blue, played professionally at a significant level. Remind us what your soccer background was. And again, it's to your credit that so quickly just your work spoke for itself and has allowed you to continue to earn bigger and bigger roles.
I appreciate that. And then again, a lot of people helped me along the way, yourself included. So many people behind the scenes that helped push me. And basically from a playing standpoint, you know, youth standout, state champion multiple times, regional champion, went to nationals, actually lost my first national championship on the field where they did the MLS's back final. So some memories this summer for sure. But, you know, when I went to college, I was actually supposed to play for John Hackworth, former national team youth coach, now head coach of Lou City at USF. He ended up leaving, and he took a job as the assistant coach for the U17 men's national team. When that happened, I was kind of just standing there looking around going, well, I've told all these other schools that I was committing to USF. I was about to sign my paperwork, and the next thing you know, I've got a month to now backtrack after recruiting and say, who's got scholarships still available? And the coach from Stetson University picked me up by word of mouth from John Hackworth, and my club coach, Mike Duncan, rest in peace, he's no longer with us. And just through their ability to convey what my playing was like, he picked me up. Coach name was Sean Murphy. I went to Stetson University. It was a blind move. Last ditch, unfortunately. And it didn't work out for me. It was a bad move collegiately. It was a small school that didn't necessarily suit what I was looking for from a personal standpoint. And then playing, I think kids don't necessarily know all the time what they're getting into when they go to the college level. But I went to the college level and realized that the style there, the coaching style, the players, it just wasn't me. So after a year and a half, I left, came home, did a bunch of semi-professional things, and had friends playing in the national system going, what are you doing? You know, you need to get out there and start playing again, which is what I did. So then multiple trials over the United States. I was with Chivas. I was with the Sounders the last year they were in USL. I was with Pittsburgh Riverhounds. And the Sounders and Riverhounds all offered me contracts. Chivas, I was on the brink of it. Unfortunately, I had a really bad ankle. That was in, I want to say it was 2007, 2008, when Preki was the head coach. Had a bad ankle injury. Got sent back after a preseason camp. Rehabbed myself, and that's when I ended up with the Riverhounds in Seattle. Both offered me contracts. Turned down both of them because I had an opportunity to go overseas and play in Germany. And it was guaranteed money, but not a lot. So I go to Germany, go to the 4th division, sign with a Regionalliga team. And then I ended up getting an opportunity to go to Hamburg, which was fantastic. Never played, but the players that were around me were massive. You're looking at world-renowned stars like Vincent Kompany, Nigel de Jong, Rafael van der Vaart, and just an opportunity to train with them here and there with the first team. It was unprecedented for me, for sure. The level I had never seen higher, but from a playing standpoint, that kind of gives you start to finish where I started at the youth level, and then professionally where I ended up prior to season-ending knee surgeries that kind of set me back and retired me at the age of 25.
most of the folks I'll talk to are play-by-play announcers around the country, a variety of sports. Spoke to Glenn Davis last month, the guy you got to be paired with on the national championships for the men's NCAA tournament and the College Cup. And I'm happy I'm starting with Glenn and you, a couple of soccer guys, because the overall focus is the restart. A lot of sports guys are dipping their toe just for the first time in remote broadcasting due to COVID protocols during this pandemic. But I know the learning curve for Glenn, the learning curve for you is much different because soccer, remote broadcasting for budgeting reasons, among others, has long been the norm. But it also reminds me, you starting as a broadcaster, I assume the vast majority of your broadcasts early on were not on site, but it was being in the studio in Florida. And so there perhaps was a little less of a learning curve there, or perhaps just the opposite.
You're spot on, Lincoln. And basically the way that it worked, you kind of referred to it earlier from a playing standpoint. I wasn't a household name, and I had to bust through that metaphorical ceiling, as you referenced. And so I was doing the quote unquote lesser games. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but you know, I'm not Alexi Lawless. I'm not Stu Holden. I'm not Taylor Twellman. I'm not going to go out and get a national job right away. And I'm certainly not going to be the voice of an MLS team right away either, because I'm not a household name. So I started off with USL games, and I was totally fine with that. But because of it, I called it kind of my boot camp of broadcasting, if you will, where you know everything for me was on monitors, and all of the people that were helping me along the way, the producers, the directors, other play-by-play people, analysts that were kind enough to lend me their ear and say, hey, you know, here's where I'm at. What do you think? They just said, listen, if you can get through monitors, you can get through anything. And I really found that true. And so monitors, they were different, especially when you started off on one monitor where I'm basically calling a game off. You don't even want to call it a big screen TV. You're doing it a 40, 42, 44-inch television, what have you. It was difficult. And it was very difficult because people who start on site, they think, okay, I can see the game right in front of me. You're always going to have someone in your ear, and then you've got the person next to you. But the person next to you is literally on top of you. You don't have that distance where maybe you're free-flowing a bit more. Your peripheral vision is definitely hindered because the screen is so small. So from an analyst standpoint, it's very difficult. It was hard for me to pick up to read the game right away. It was much different than being at home, because at home you sit there and maybe you're having a beer with your friends, or you're at the pub, or some popcorn or what have you, and you're looking at the screen and you're like, yeah, defense is weak. You know, we haven't created a lot of opportunities. But when you have to actually break it down of positionally locating players and maybe they're misusing this space, I found that very difficult at first. But there were some caveats that you could find where maybe when my play-by-play was talking and you understood where your space was compared to theirs, you could watch players off the ball a bit more than you normally would. You know, normally we're so accustomed to, no matter the sport, soccer, football, baseball, hockey, we're watching the ball, we're watching the puck. And that's really simple for us. That's not the case from an analyst role. And I quite rapidly found myself watching everything else around the game and taking my knowledge, if you will, to the next level without even knowing it.
Yeah, I'm mindful that as people adjust to monitors, the play-by-play should have the least amount of adjustment required, because almost every sport, we are following the ball by definition to keep the folks at home connected with what is going on exactly at that moment live. Whereas an analyst, it helps for you to have the big picture. If you're using all of your experience, you're anticipating what might happen next, which means you're looking around to see if, in fact, that is developing. With monitors, that's a little harder to do, since almost every time we are limited to exactly what the folks at home are looking at. I've been spoiled. You may have been as well in some scenarios where we actually have a second monitor that shows us all the cameras so we can kind of peek around. But for the most part, I appreciate that your job's a little harder off the monitors than mine. And I thought you did a good job right there kind of explaining what you can still do within those confinements.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm with you on that one. So my first experience, a fun one, you go from that one screen, big screen or not, if you will, and you go from that. I picked up really fortunate opportunity. My first one with ESPN, I did ICC Futures. And for people that don't know, ICC Futures, ICC Tournament, International Champions Cup, massive names, Manchester United, Liverpool, Fiorentina, Roma, Real Madrid, so on and so forth, come to the United States every year during the summer, kick off their preseason play tournament. They started doing the same thing for youths in 2018, and we did it out of Y World, ESPN in Orlando. So I walked into the production booth, and even though we were on site, most of the games we actually did from a production booth in their studio. So, you know, you're calling games 100 yards from you. but you're doing it in the booth. And they do that a lot for Pop Warner and basketball and stuff. And I walked in and it was like Mecca. You know, there's the big screen in the middle. And then all of a sudden, both myself and play-by-play had our own ISOs. We had our own ISO monitors. So they're like, what do you want? And I kind of looked at them and said, for lunch or a bottle of water? And the producer's like, no, what angles do you want? This was Greek to me. You know, I had only ever had the luxury of what was being put in front of me. You know, the one screen and then my director giving me at that point in time 4 cameras from the shows, which was crazy. Now all of a sudden I'm running an 8 or 10 camera show. You know, I got a low mid, I can get behind the goal. We got 18s to get everything. So then you start to take the next step from a production standpoint, where if you're given the luxury of those other angles, now you have to figure out in your mind, what do you like? You know, do you want to see the low angles where maybe you can follow the 1v1 play a little bit more? Do you want an ISO on a specific player so that you can run some packages later in the game? Obviously, I always love the 18 so I can track offside. And I'm a big fan of the behind the goal as well. Kind of a style thing, set piece opportunities, you know, a high above the goal. You can see stuff coming off a free kick. You can see stuff the way they play out. But that was, again, it was very difficult for me personally to grasp that. And I would say that it took me the better portion of the 2018 and 2019 season, both being in studio situations and being on the road where you are given the luxury of the extra monitors and camera angles, to really grasp what was being put in front of me. More importantly, what would I do with that? How would I now convey those cameras and those pictures that were given to me to the audience and call for it and say, hey, this would be great to show the viewer at home. Give me that. Or pop in, see, give me camera 4, all that kind of stuff. And that was really difficult for me to pick up.
That reminds me how if you do make it to be that voice of MLS, life may not be better in terms of that setup. I'll pick back up in that in a moment. But a lot of your work and where we crossed paths was in Florida at Vista, where they literally have just one booth next to another. You may have 3 or 4 games from all across the country going on at the exact same time. You and Vista, for the most part, by the fact that they found you, by the fact that they had a Mike Watts and a couple of others, were able to really, I think, improve their quality really quickly and rely on you guys because you're in one site and you could do multiple matches in one day. We're able to take on a lot of the work in that partnership with the USL Championship and other leagues. Well, what's the most hectic stretch you've had with them over the past couple of years?
Oof, that's a really good question. So it's all about repetitions in this business, right? And you kind of just said it, where I've done 4 games in one day, which is either really good or psychotic. I haven't figured that one out yet. I've had a couple stretches with them, and it starts with, you can go earlier this year, actually, where when Champions League was going on, working for CONCACAF, where we would do a studio show, and we would tape our studio show at 4:00. And I've taken studio show at 4:00. I did USL calls for games the next day, conference calls for coaches from 5 till about 7. And then I did back-to-back Champions League games. That was pretty crazy for me. One of the biggest ones for me that really stands out, though, was continuing through in the opportunity with ESPN. I've been pretty active on the collegiate scene. You mentioned College Cup with Glenn Davis, which has been fantastic for me, and also picking up national games as well. Last year, I was asked to do the USL League One final. I hadn't done a League One game all season long, but because I'm the featured analyst and lead analyst for USL, they asked me to do the final. I said, no problem. From a prep standpoint, I'm crazy. I cannot, and this is my own preference, but I cannot walk into a match without seeing at least 75% of a team's games. In that situation, I hadn't seen a single one, and they had played like 15. So I literally found out 2 weeks before. So I'm looking at 30 games roughly between the two teams, Greenville and North Texas. I prepped all those. So I had a Friday night game at Yale in Connecticut, and they were playing Cornell. My flight was Saturday morning. I was flying back. The game for, I think the League One final was at like 5:00. The problem for all of this, though, was that I had committed to do, we had USL Game of the Week, and at that point in time, we had our national games and we had ESPN 3 games. Well, an ESPN 3 game had gotten moved up to a 1:00 kick time, and I was on a 9 a.m. flight out of Connecticut. Producers didn't like that, and they didn't like the connecting flight either. So long story short, probably the craziest span that I had was flew up Thursday afternoon to Connecticut, did the interviews with coaches and players. Friday, called the game in Connecticut at Yale. But because I couldn't catch a direct flight out of Hartford, I called the game from 5 to 7, jumped in a rental car, drove from Yale to New York City, stayed there, took a 5:45 flight from NYC to Atlanta, then Atlanta to Fort Lauderdale, got picked up in Fort Lauderdale by the producer at like 9:30, went to breakfast, called the 1 o'clock game, which finished at 3:15, couldn't even leave because the next game was at 5, went downstairs to the studio, called a 5 o'clock game, which finished at 7:30, I believe. And by the time I was done and out of the studio, it was 8:30. And the next thing you know, I'm kind of going, man, that was a long 72 hours. Fun though, that's what makes you stronger.
The things we complain about are not real problems that other people actually experience when they show up to work. Certainly, we enjoy what we do. You mentioned the prep for the League One, which is incredible. I try to remind when I'm paired with newer analysts, I don't want them to show up unprepared, but I try to remind them, you have literally lived your whole life around this sport. If you were to show up to a soccer match or whatever your sport is and join me on the commentary, you should already be able to do a B+, A- job without even knowing a single thing about the two teams based on watching things develop out there, whether you're a former coach, former player. And then the way you improve and you take it to that icing on the cake is by all of a sudden knowing the teams and being able to anticipate that much more of what they're going to do next. But what you mentioned, getting prepped for that League One championship, that would be quite the undertaking. As if a tournament's not hard enough because you don't know necessarily the two teams that far in advance who are going to make it to the final. But yeah, we all have our crazy and borderline irresponsible travel stories of saying yes to every job that is sent our way. So let me pick back up on the day you one day become an MLS voice. You're going to realize the grass isn't always greener necessarily, because as Glenn Davis reminded me, I was asking him, because you and me, for the most part, if we're in a studio, we are the primary broadcast. Our director, our producer, they are choosing the shots they want for our show. Overwhelmingly, that's the case. Major League Soccer, for the most part, if you're the road team, you don't have the additional director, producer who's just grabbing the cameras that are being used on site and piecing it together for their broadcast. They're getting basically a clean feed without the other team's graphics of what their on-site crew is putting together. And so you're at the mercy of what they want to talk about. Have you had many experiences along those lines where you're just hoping that a camera shot will linger on a guy long enough for you to break down what's going on?
I have. It's an interesting process for sure. And for people that are just breaking through to it or trying to get better at it, you have to have a lot of patience and understand that it's actually helped me get better with my talking points. I found that I was very long-winded when I first started, and it's still a crutch of mine that I have to be careful with, because I'm so excited to share with the viewers what I'm seeing and the player and what's waking down and stuff. But you have to be careful with that as well. You don't always need to tell a short story nor an essay. Sometimes it's just a statement, and a statement can go a long ways. It's kind of like the picture is worth 1,000 words type thing. Sometimes a sentence can do the same exact thing, but you have to pick and choose your moments. And it is different when you're on that road feed and being in that situation so many times. You just have to rely on the person next to you. Number one, having that camaraderie with a play-by-play person, whether working with them or not. The biggest piece of advice I could ever give to anyone is, if you have never worked with a play-by-play person, have a conversation ahead of time. Have a conversation, whether it's the night before the game, the day of the game. Sit down person to person and say, hey, what do you like? What do you dislike? Just so you know, I may end up doing this. I may end up doing that. So even if the camera starts to cut away in another direction, you understand that if I stop right away because I'm making a quick point, you can pick up. It's like, Lincoln, if you and I were going back and forth and I'm talking about a player and there's an ISO 1v1 and all of a sudden it cuts off and now they've broken into the final 20 yards, I'm probably going to drop off and let you do your thing. If I don't have that conversation, a less experienced play-by-play person may pause for a second, miss the moment. A less experienced analyst may just keep talking and run right through the moment, which is very bad for both of us. Because at the end of the day, we just want to put on a good show, you understand? And so recognizing those moments is really important. The monitors itself, without naming names, and everybody's got their own preferences, you're always going to be frustrated in those situations because the home broadcast, you get to talk to the cameramen. Like you said, the producer and director are at your beck and call. When you don't have that luxury, someone else is flying the show, but you're still a passenger. And so how do you navigate those waters? Be more precise, say less, still be polite. I've always personally take this for what it is. I want to call a national game no matter what, even if I'm on a road broadcast, because that road broadcast, I know MLS teams aren't a big fan of that because they pay for their home, their road broadcasts as their home voices. But fans want to hear, a lot of times they want to hear the neutral voices. Brian Dunseth from Real Salt Lake is really good at that. And understanding that even if it cuts off that camera angle in a certain area, it's okay to talk about both sides. It's okay to tell the big picture. And, I think at the end of the day, just having patience, kind of like what I've said twice, is the biggest thing because you're going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. I've heard it on the Masters over the weekend. I've heard it in the Super Bowl. Everybody makes mistakes. Get on with it. If you sit there and stutter and keep going over it and then hinder your performance for the rest of the day, that's when people remember you. You make one mistake, forget about it, move on, have a laugh over a cocktail or a beer or water after the game and keep going because it's all about reps and to smooth up that ability to convey the actions, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned that dynamic with play-by-play analysts who haven't worked a lot together. I try to remind myself to point out to them, like let's say specifically with soccer, look, we're on TV, and I'm lucky that basically all of my work now is TV. It's not looks-based, apparently, in this endeavor, but for some reason, it's been all TV, which means if I don't say something, the folks at home can still see it. So if you have a good point and we're between the 18s, stay with it. Elaborate on that point. At the same time, if we both happen to start talking at the same time, I let them know, I'm going to stop talking. You go ahead and don't apologize because nobody's going to notice that we briefly spoke over each other until one of us stops to apologize to the other person. But there's little quirks like that we all have that we try to help out the other one get up to speed on. You mentioning that when you drop off, that's a good sign that for me in that final third to go ahead and pick up with things. So let's pick up now back in March. What is your schedule for 2020 looking like before everything comes to a stop?
Really good, actually. I was very confident. My goal, so to backtrack for a second, so you give you a little bit of a premise of where I'm coming from. When I did 2018, I didn't work the full year. I worked from March until November. I got a couple opportunities at the collegiate level. I did the ICC as mentioned, but that was it. No US Open Cup, no MLS games, anything like that. So my goal coming into 2019 was to work year round. I started in March of 2019. I never finished. I was very fortunate that I achieved my goal and I'd set myself up not only for 2019 to continue working, but for years to come. COVID changed all of that. Come March, we were in full swing for Champions League into the quarterfinals. USL had just kicked off its inaugural weekend. I had already started writing for MLS. Open Cup, I had set myself up to make a nice little run there behind the scenes in terms of negotiations. I was doing Generation Adidas Cup. Wow, there's a lot. Let me think. International with CONCACAF as well for World Cup qualifying. College in the fall. Still plan on doing College Cup when it comes this coming spring, but that was all set up. Had some stuff set up for the Big Ten Network. So I was kind of all over the map, and I was going to work year round again. Second week of March, that all changed, and the world came crashing down for a lot of people. And I want to be very careful here with my wording and for people to understand that when I'm telling this story, I'm not discrediting anybody's situation. I'm not taking away from what anybody else went through, just telling you what I went through, because I'm probably, like yourself, one of the fortunate ones that was able to get back to work and continue to put money in my pocket. And I'm very grateful for that. So I was literally, to give you an idea, I was driving on, I believe it was Thursday, the 18th of March. I was driving to the studio to call the Cruz Azul LAFC game, first leg for the quarterfinals. Got a call about 30 minutes out from the studio that the game had been canceled. Couldn't tell a soul. Had to turn around and go home. And I was just like, okay, I think this could be really bad. And so turn around, go home. That Friday, we did the CONCACAF Champions League studio show, the SCCL show, finished the show, executive producer and head of broadcasting for CONCACAF pulled us aside and said, yeah, can't tell anybody, we're done. And we don't know when we're coming back. We're going to tell the general public that we're delaying this for a little while, but you guys understand that you're probably done for a couple months. And I said, okay. Yeah. Next following day, I was told that U.S. Open Cup was delayed, though there was probably a good chance it was going to be canceled or postponed. We then found out that it was canceled for the year months later. Generation Adidas Cup for all the youth, that was no longer taking place. ICC, that was no longer taking place. The college season was in jeopardy, although a couple months away. And USL, there were rumblings that, hey, this probably wasn't going any further. MLS, hey, any sideline gigs, any writing, anything that's going to going on, that's going to stop as well. And you kind of just look around and go, what am I going to do for work? It goes from, hey, how do I literally supposed to be the biggest year of my career and all of this is set up in front of me to, I need to find a way to take care of my wife, who, by the way, is 8 months pregnant. And we're doing, very fortunate, but we had set up some things to go on in our home from a construction standpoint. And you're looking around going, I need to put bread on the table. It was a surreal moment, and it was very, very scary. We had to sit down and kind of go, okay, what are you going to do? What can we do? How much money is out there in the pipeline? Being a broadcaster, you understand that if you're not under contract with a specific company, you're usually an independent contractor, which means you're invoicing and it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it may be. I had banked a lot, so I was very fortunate, a lot in the sense that, we could make bills and things like that. And you sure as hell couldn't go get another job. I mean, COVID kicked in and it wasn't like I could go be a delivery driver or, go back to work for a family. Again, I was an estate manager in my former life and do that again. Couldn't coach. No kids were playing any sports. And it was scary. It was very, very scary. I'm very lucky that lack of work only lasted for about 3 weeks for me. You and I talked behind the scenes coming on that USL did an E-Cup with Rocket League. That was super, super fun. Weird though, right? They called me, hey, you want to do a video game? And but yeah, they threw the video game in front of us, and that was kind of the next adventure, if you will.
Yeah, I was making sure I had all the facts right about that. You and Mike, separately from your own homes, correctly, were calling those video game matches Rocket League, the esports. That was the USL E-Cup. What was that experience like? As much prep as you like to do, I imagine you weren't watching the competitors' previous 30 matches to try to figure out what their little quirks were. What did you tell yourself was going to be the appropriate presentation for that kind of show?
You got me. There were only a few guys coming in through all the teams that participated. There were USL League One and USL Championship teams, mostly Championship, but a few League One teams. There were only a few that had real playing experience. The player from FC Tucson was actually like a collegiate national champion and a professional, and he won the whole thing. He was insane. The player from El Paso, he was actually the first signee for a USL Championship team as an E-player, so that was kind of cool. Birmingham had a player that had a lot of experience. I think he went to the University of Alabama, named Michaela Hodges. Really nice kid. Everybody else, you're Googling names, you're looking for background info, and after about 5 or 10 minutes a person, you kind of went, I'm getting nowhere, and I'm getting nowhere fast. So I made the cognizant decision real quick after chatting with the producer as well that I was going to give it a different spin. You talked about kind of the professionalism that I bring and how I want to make sure that I'm bringing as much as possible every single time, understanding that wasn't dissecting the game. We were talking about rocket-powered cars in a dome that were exploding, that had turbos and power-ups and boosts. How did I tailor my broadcast to that? I decided to go towards the route of the broadcaster from Major League and the guy from Dodgeball. And I thought, you know what?
You didn't go out on Interstate 4 in Florida and experience this going up and down?
No, thank goodness. Yeah, it was more of just hanging out and saying funny things off the top of the head, still being polite to the players, of course, because they were doing it for charity and good causes, but I was having fun with it. I felt like the time that we were in Lincoln, again, this is basically the first week of March and all the way through the month. So we went on like 26 days of a run there, working every single day. And I felt like people needed to have some fun. They needed to laugh a little bit. They were dark times, and they still are now, but it was different then. Most people didn't have jobs. Most people, not just broadcasting, weren't getting up and working their 9 to 5. They were having trouble getting food, toilet paper, believe it or not, and paper towels and bleach, like things that are everyday, amenities that all of a sudden you don't have access to. And are we going to have dinner tonight? What am I going to do for money? How do I pay rent? And so I felt like I would have a little fun with it. And so I'd say stupid things. I say funny things. I'd have calls behind the scenes with some of the players, get a little banter going. They were pretty engaging on social media, and I had fun. I thought it was a blast personally. It was interesting that the feedback we were getting on Reddit and social media, they loved it too. At least from what I saw, they liked the fact that they knew that we were being as serious as possible while also trying to put smiles on people's faces. But again, sitting in my home, working with someone in New York, the producer was in, I believe, Arizona. And then the guy who was running the actual software was based out of like Philly. So all four of us together, again, another situation where being on monitors helped me there. You understand the feeds that are coming through. There were audio issues all over the place. Plenty of times audio cut out, meaning like music and the talking to the producers and directors, and you just let it go. And you relied on the person on the other side of the microphone to lead you. And I was fortunate that, Mike Watts and I, we've worked together a lot and figured it out, had a blast.
Yeah, I've had a chance, different sports, not all remote setups are the same, but that dynamic where the two announcers are physically not in the same room, you underestimate how much it means to have at least the person you're talking to next to you, in the sense that you get a sense for where they're going and when they are or are not about to begin their next thought. When you're on separate sites, did you and Mike consider having a separate live video stream just so you could see the other person, so you could lock eyes with the other person?
It's a good question. So we were fortunate enough in the software that we were using, we actually had picture-in-picture on the top.
Okay.
So we didn't have the ability, unfortunately, with the person who was running the software out of Pennsylvania, nor with the producer, but he and I did have each other. So if for any reason, if we lost communication with each other, which had happened a lot, and we did it during broadcast, sometimes we just continued on because we knew the other one, 30 seconds to close the program, reboot, and jump back on. And it didn't make sense to make the players start the game over or reboot the whole feed. Producers figured that out as well. Now, it took us a couple opportunities at the beginning to go, what are we doing? We realized quite rapidly that working till 2 o'clock in the morning wasn't the most efficient thing. And we had to figure out how to change things so that everybody was the benefactor. And that was one of the things. So, Mike, he green screened it through new NYC behind him. I just let it roll. Sometimes we were on camera, sometimes we weren't. But again, another different situation where you kind of just rolled with the punches. We were also, to be fair, given that luxury by the head brass, if you will, at USL. And they said, have fun with it, be honest, call it as you see it, but, make people smile. And if you think something seems wrong or seems right, just roll with it.
So let me pick up, during the summer, obviously, USL Championship eventually announced they would return in July. My understanding is you, Mike, the other announcers, eventually that meant you returned to the studio instead of calling it from your living room. Am I right on that?
Yeah, you're spot on.
So how did calling matches from that studio look any different than perhaps for the first week of the season and the 2 years prior that you'd been calling USL Championship and some of the other partners that Vista has?
Fantastic question. And there are so many things that changed. Start with the first game back, which was a USL Championship game. Mike and I, being employed by the league directly for those matches, we used the big studio in the downstairs area, which gives us more camera angles, gives us a desk if we want it, gives us more monitors, a bigger area to work with. So we come back in, he and I are on literally opposite sides of the room. We were probably sitting a solid 30 feet from each other. That gives you an idea. And there's movement on either side as well, or space on either side, I should say. It gives you an idea on how big the room is. He was a solid 30 feet from me. When we did our stand-ups and our ISOs, there was no welcome in together in the booth. We were heavily separated. But it started even before that with the protocols coming into the studio itself. No longer were independent contractors allowed to be given badges. So when you went through the security check-in, I couldn't use my security pass to get in. I had to actually ring in. They would buzz me in. And then from there, they carried 24/7 a certified nurse practitioner on staff that would run you through a series of checks to make sure that you were okay. Because again, not only are we getting back to work, this crazy COVID, like it or not, it is something, and it's going around the world, and it's going around the United States. And at that point in time, you're looking around going, do I have to touch that door handle? Do I have to stand next to this person? Do I have to talk into this? It was scary. It was very, very scary, Lincoln. But when you walked in, took your temperature, you had to fill out every single time that you entered and exited the building. You had to fill out electronic documents that stated your whereabouts, where you had been in the last 24 to 48 hours, had you come in contact with anyone, were there any symptoms? And so if I came in and I went to the gas station to put gas in my car because I was driving home at midnight, I had to do the same thing all over again. You had to wear masks. Guys had, plastic face shields. Your interaction, which this was probably the most difficult thing for me, your interaction with the production staff directly was finite at best. You understand how important it is to create those relationships with people off camera and go, here's the storylines we're going through. Hey, can we move this segment there? We got to scrap this. This looks great from a timing standpoint, but let's move this up. We basically got like 5 minutes to be in a room with someone, and then they separated us, and all we could do was talk to them. And again, kind of the evolution of being on a monitor, then being on a site, and then doing the video game and talking around. That was another step that we had to take. And it was difficult. You had to, once again, tailor your actions and go, okay, I need to get there an hour earlier. And I would get there an hour earlier and sit there because the production meetings were no longer in person. There was pauses with the director, with the replay, with my audio, with my producer, and going, how do we figure this out? How do we figure that out? It seemed like the same complications or frustration, I should say, that we were dealing with on our side, that was playing out on site as well. So all of the camera operators and everybody working on site were dealing with the same issues because we couldn't talk to people. We couldn't sit down and talk to them. That was really hard. And once we moved off of the national games, we moved into private booths where we were sitting maybe 10, 15 feet apart. But again, our desks are now encompassed in plexiglass. So I'm sitting behind the play-by-play person. So now I've gone from being on site to standing next to someone, to sitting next to someone, to being in a room 30 feet apart. Now I'm 10, 15 feet apart, but they're in front of me at a diagonal angle. I mean, you can understand how difficult it was. Any single time someone wanted to talk to me, literally had to look and go like that. Big no-no. You have to turn your head around. Always want to stay locked in with someone. So we did a lot of extra repetitions behind the scenes, Mike Watts and I, to try and figure that out. Anybody that I worked with, Josh Eastern, Tyler took off to MLS, but those are primarily my two play-by-play people that I worked with. And so we did extra reps, tried to figure it out, because for the first basically 14 days, we did, I think it was 10 nationally televised games on ESPN2 in like 14 days. So not only was it coming back with a fury of games, and you're going through COVID protocol, and this person's not where they're supposed to be, and you can't talk to that person. It was hard. But again, just like everything else, it made us stronger, 100%. It made us so much better with our ability to convey what we were seeing, but also talk to the producer, talk to production staff, and at the end of the day, put on a good show.
It's reassuring, though, to hear that all of that was taken into consideration and executed there. Yeah. For everybody's safety involved. I asked just because obviously when you and I are working together in those booths, you can't put 6 feet between you and your broadcast partner. You are in a confined booth with your monitor right in front of your face, and your partner maybe a foot between the two of you. But you appreciate all that. Personally, my schedule shut down in mid-March. Right after signing off to a baseball game, I promised our viewers we were going to have the weekend college baseball series coming up. Of course, that was a promise that went unfulfilled. I was in the same boat. When I showed up to the soccer matches in the summer, I was not embarrassed. I would show up wearing gloves. And even if it wasn't because I was going to be touching a lot of things, it was just a reminder to me, let's not touch everything you might normally be tweaking with on some knobs on audio and some other things. And there was the debate, should I be bringing my own headset to these different events? Anything I'm in contact with, I appreciate the protocols when I was on site for some matches, knowing that everybody else was going through the same hoops. I knew I could take care of what I did in my personal life, very conservative with any risks I was taking. But you just don't know, even the best of intentions of people who are going to be on your crew, what they could or could not avoid doing in their personal life. But again, that is reassuring to hear that everything was basically what you would hope it'd be. over there with the majority of your games. In addition to USL Championship, now we'll point out to the folks who don't follow the USL Championship, they actually wound up canceling their final between the Rowdies, Tampa Bay, and Phoenix Rising, just because overcoming some of the positive tests was going to be too much. But when that schedule ended, what does the rest of your fall and winter now look like?
So there were a couple of opportunities for me to do some things. Basically, so that occurred this Sunday would be 3 weeks. Well, I should say Saturday would be 3 weeks of when they canceled the match. There were a couple things that I had the opportunity to go do. I'm not going to name them, out of respect for confidentiality and the people that did end up doing them. I decided to take a little time. And the reason was, even though I lost not only money, but games, I really, throughout all of this, I had a son. So my son was born on May 30th. So one of the things that I didn't mention was, and you kind of alluded to it on your side, where you're going to do whatever you can on your side to make sure that you're taking care of what you can take care of. And I basically got 1 month with my son before I went back to work. And that's not a woe is me comment. I was very fortunate to have that month, but it was only because of the pandemic. Believe it or not, I was actually supposed to be out of town for a match the day that my wife went into labor, and the proximity of my whereabouts, I would never have been able to been there. So I'll consider that a silver lining. I mean, she went into labor at around 2:30. The baby came out at 7:25. In that 5-hour frame, I wasn't going to get on a plane and get home. So I was able to be home for that. And then for that month, I got to spend with him. But then going back to work, and this was a good problem to have, I didn't sleep. And that wasn't because I had a baby. Again, I was very fortunate that I went back to work, but I was doing 5, 6, 7, 8 games a week. It was insane. And some of that was the league and teams asking you to do the games. Some of it was the production company needing help. Some of it was me trying to recoup money. Others was just me wanting to do work because, like you said before, we enjoy this. Although I've taken time off, I'm bored right now, man. Like I'm ready to go back to work. I'm itching, but I had a couple opportunities.
I was wondering why you accepted this invite to join me, but now it makes sense.
Well, I got the direct deposit, so I appreciate that. No,
that was meant for the Canadian goalkeeper, but we'll fix that.
I have a great story about that, by the way. But yeah, I basically had gone nonstop, and even the day of the final when they canceled it, I knew they had canceled the final, had already checked out from my hotel, and was in my car driving home when Taylor Twellman who's the first person to leak it, tweeted it on Twitter. Everybody starts reaching out to me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm in the middle of Central Florida. I'm going to shut my phone off, do my own thing. So I decided to take some time off, spend time with my family, just enjoy the next couple weeks. And what's next for me is Champions League. Champions League is coming back. I will be doing that. They're going to be based out of Orlando, so I'll be doing those games. We'll do the finalization of the quarterfinals and the semifinals and the final. They are going to one-leg games, so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I'll get involved in CONCACAF League and the knockout rounds, which CONCACAF League is the prelude to the 2021 Champions League season, so that'll be kind of cool. I'll also be doing some World Cup qualifying, which I'm excited about. Collegiately, I'm ready to get back to work. They put onto paper, in theory, although I've still heard from brass behind the scenes that it's not set in stone, that the soccer national championships will take place in the spring now.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for that. I will basically be going from doing, and I'm really excited about this, that it's slowing down a little bit, but still working. I'm going to go from doing, in the month of October, I think I had like 50 usages to I'll do like 15 over the next, 15 a month for the next 2 months or so. Next 3 months. So still working, still making money, very fortunate in that aspect, but I'm also not running myself into the ground and still giving myself that opportunity to work year round, which is good. I may look back on my wallet in a couple of weeks and wonder why I didn't decide to take more, but we all need a vacation too. And my vacation just happens to be taking a lesser workload, spending time with my son. And then this, as mentioned to you before we came on, this ridiculous project at my house that gets me no sleep during the day. So.
Well, again, glad that's all picking up. And obviously, we all hope the robust schedules that we were anticipating in 2020 do pick back up in 2021, as long as it's safe to do so. But again, I really wanted to talk to you and fortunate enough to talk to Glenn at the start of these conversations because for the most part, the folks involved in soccer, this has probably been the least adjustment required when it comes to calling things off monitors for whatever the reason may be, just because it's already been such a big part of what we have done in covering the sport for a myriad of reasons. And even with that said, clearly everything you've shared here in the past 40 plus minutes has been a reminder of just how much there is involved. If you were to now kind of take someone under your wing, they were going to be an analyst, followed a similar path as you for soccer, and they were going to try to get into the business and be faced with calling things off monitors, what's the most helpful thing that you can share with them?
Number one, watch as much tape as possible. Understand that for every you, there's 50 other yous. And that may be a bit more diluted from a play-by-play standpoint. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but there are a lot more play-by-play people than there are analysts. And so you guys have to work harder for sure and try and set yourself apart. But from an analyst role, the big ones start to separate themselves. And the next thing you know, you can kind of turn the corner and go, what happened here? And so watch as much tape as possible. Have self-realization and be willing to take criticism, because having an ego in this business is not an easy thing to do. Again, not everybody is a world-renowned national team player or an MLS player that played in the league for 10, 15 years. And so you're going to have to take some hits in that area. But then the feedback you're going to get, whether being in the industry for 5, 10, 15 years or just breaking through, kind of like you said, someone coming underneath my wing, understand that people, even now, people aren't going to like you. Every producer is going to tell you something different. I could literally line up, and I won't say their names, but I could line up my 2 most trusted people that I talk to at ESPN that help my career, that give me my usages, that, tell me give me all my feedback there. I could line up the executive producer from the studio at Vista. I could talk to MLS execs from specific teams. I could talk to the guys at CONCACAF, and every single producer would tell me something different when I ask them a specific question. That's okay. You can't make everybody happy. The most important thing is that you get better every single time you go out, or at least try to. Take the information you're being given and actually process it. I hear so many kids, and I say kids because there are a lot of young people breaking in the industry, good for them, but I hear so many of them go, I don't care about that. That doesn't mean anything to me. I don't agree with that. You don't necessarily have to agree, but sometimes by your just unwillingness to agree, you close yourself off to so many other things, and then you close yourself off to other opportunities, because that behavior that you're displaying, whether you do it indirectly with maybe a shrug, an eye roll, whether you say it directly to that person, relationships become everything in this business. And it quite rapidly goes from, I mentioned that the analysts setting themselves apart, you can push yourself away from opportunities without even knowing it, just because you didn't handle that situation correctly. And so be polite, be honest. There are many times, you asked me a question earlier of the most difficult kind of stretch of games that I had ever been through. And I talked about the travel and this, that, and the other. There are many times where opportunities are going to come your way, and it's really simple to say no. I was doing a game on a Saturday night at 10:30. It was a Remy game that I was doing in Phoenix. I'm not going to say what the next game was out of respect for the person that stepped away. This is going back to 2018. But the person that stepped away from the gig was doing a Sunday morning game that was supposed to be Saturday night that got postponed. That game was at 9 a.m. Producer walks in. Producer says, can you do this match? Without hesitancy, didn't ask what it was. I didn't ask who it was. I said, give it to me. I was hungry. I would still say the same thing now. I left that game at 10:30. I went off air at 12:45. I worked till 5 a.m. I slept for 2 hours. I was at the studio at 8 o'clock. I called a 9 a.m. game, and I went home and took a nap that day. It would be real simple for anyone to go, I'm not going to get enough sleep. I'm going to have to do too much prep. Don't ever put your head down. Always push to the next opportunity, because if you don't do it, someone's right over your shoulder, especially if you're not a household name, and then you're out of luck.
You're lucky if there's only one person looking over your shoulder waiting for that opportunity. Really. Again, it's a reminder of how fortunate we are that we actually managed to get these opportunities that so many other people want. So let me in addition to that, do you have advice for a play-by-play announcer who's about to call a remote, what they can do to make the experience a more positive one for their analyst?
Great question. Ask as many questions as possible of your analyst, number one, whether you've worked with them 1 time or 20 times. I would say the same for every single person that's on the production staff. Any ability you have to better yourself within this upcoming gig, have that conversation. Because it's real simple to look and go, I'm going to get paid X amount of dollars for X amount of work and break it down hourly. Don't do that now, because this opportunity will only lead to more. And especially Lincoln, and you can attest to this, the way that the actual industry is going for any sport, there's going to be a lot more Remy and opportunities in general, COVID or not. That was already happening. Now the fact that this is starting to go that direction a bit more because of these issues, you have to find a way to break through. And I would just say communicate and say, before the show, after the show, what do you like? What do you dislike? What was good? What was bad? Take that knowledge, put it to heart, and really try and implement it. I know for a long time, one of the things that I heard, and this is pre-COVID, obviously, and I'm going back to 17 or 18, and I still have a tendency to do it, is I talk really, really fast because I'm so excited and I want to tell everybody what's going on and listen to that and listen to this. And it took me a long time of people saying, you need to slow down. You need to go listen to this. But I also asked those questions. I said over and over and over again, you were one of the people that I asked. I said, what was good? What was bad? Ask those same questions going into these matches. Say, listen, I've never called a game off monitors. Maybe I'm talking too fast. Is it okay for you to tell me to slow down during a game? Yeah, it is. Are you able for someone to tell you that and then apply it to your trade? Not everybody can. Practice at home. Have a conversation with play-by-play and say, listen, if I'm going too slow, help speed me up. If I'm long-winded, write me a little note. If the producer and director aren't giving you what you want, communicate to that. Because it's really easy to push that talk back button and go, hey, this isn't right. I see this or that. When it's on a monitor, you're not going to see as much. So communicate and say, guys, how are things going? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? You're going to have to push yourself further. But and again, at the end of the day, this is all going to pay off for everybody involved, because it goes back to your performance, the person next to you, the people in the booth, in the truck, in the production truck, and then those relationships that you create. It's all full circle to help you take that next step.
Well, Devon, again, you're kind of reminding folks who are tuning in, and some of them who are meeting you for the first time, why you're one of the many teammates I've had, but one of the few that really stand out. And I look forward to when you and I get to share a booth, or even if we're just calling the same match from our own living rooms, similar to right now. But I look forward to when we cross paths again. Congratulations on all you have already achieved so quickly and what is still to come in your future. I appreciate you setting this time aside.
Thank you so much for the kind words, man. I can't wait. My brother lives in Austin, so maybe I can get out there. We'll get Ryan Thompson and Marcelo. We'll go have a little beer after COVID settles down. But no matter where it is, anytime, any place, I look forward to working with you, man. And like you said, let's keep working. Let's stay positive, trudge through this together, and keep taking steps in our careers, and we'll have some fun on the way.
And cut. All right. Hey, thank you very much. Good luck. Good luck with your HGTV project there going on. And again, congratulations on the expanding family.
I appreciate it, brother. One little last glimpse. This is my front door. I don't have one. I don't have a front door anymore.
That is great for quarantining purposes, I guess.